Welcome to the TinyBox Dialogues. This series was created to share the knowledge of our experts using real examples from real people with real stories. Now, last week we discussed how can we learn from musicians who put their audience at the middle and the center of every performance, similar to how businesses put customers at the center of their strategy. Today, we continued this discussion by speaking to customer-centricity expert Melanie Hoffmann. Now, after several years working at Amazon, she started her own boutique consulting agency, Customer Delight, where she supports clients to overcome current business challenges and continue on a sustainable growth path. And you may ask, why did we focus this dialogue on customer retention? The reason is that customer retention is cheaper than finding new customers. How much? 7 times cheaper to acquire than acquiring a new customer is to retain an old one. Yet, in most industries, the average customer retention rate is below 20%. I'm sure that Melanie is going to shed some light on this in our discussion. She's also going to end the session by sharing 5 concrete steps that we can take away today to retain customers. First things first, though, as Laura would always say, let's start with the backstory. So Melanie, what is the backstory that brought you on your customer experience journey?
Yes, hi Raj, hi Laura. First of all, everybody, thank you for having me and talking with me about one of my passion topics today, customer centricity. My backstory. When I was working in the media industry for several years, I already was involved in product development. First, there were print magazines, new launching print magazines, later digital products. And already there, I noticed how difficult it can be for an organization to keep the focus on the customer needs first and not instantly jump to revenue calculations, resource limitations, and all these other thoughts at the wrong time in a process. So that was, I think, when I became initially thrilled with always putting the customer first. And then later, at my time at Amazon, I saw firsthand what can happen and what you can move if you look at the customer constantly and do this in a very structured and systematic way. And that was, of course, very exciting. So when I decided to continue my path by myself with my own consulting agency, it was clear to me that I want to work with companies who also have this heartfelt desire to bring products and services into the world that really add value and solve problems for their customers. And because in the end, that is what customer centricity is for me.
It seems appropriate that you say heartfelt desire, because I was on LinkedIn where you state in the LinkedIn summary with the quote, customer centricity is not a short-term tactic, but a mindset. Now, customer centricity as a term is used by many organizations this last 20 years, and I am sure that they cannot all claim to be customer centric. So why don't we start there? When and why did this become a trendy thing to say?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know if I can answer this completely. And I think in many cases, unfortunately, it's just a buzzword because many people, many companies, they just feel safe and more secure to claiming following one of these trends and concentrating on it, but not all of them do. And customer centricity or Kundenorientierung in German, the concept of it is very old already, obviously. Yeah. But when these buzzwords became more hyped, I think it was also through companies like Amazon who proclaimed very prominently that they do this and that this is in their focus. And then this became more of a focus for more companies and for the media to write about and the marketing industry and so on. So maybe that's when it started, but there are many companies, not only Amazon out there, who do a great job in that.
Yeah, I guess with as as we use buzzwords and we don't always understand exactly what they mean, maybe we should start there. Can you explain to us what you think it means and what it actually means to you?
Mm-hmm. For me, customer centricity is really a holistic process, even rather a mindset, as you quoted me before. Thank you for doing that. And for me, it includes your company vision and mission, all your processes, your communication, your products, and of course also your employees and your whole organization, for example. And yeah, as the title of our webinar actually is increase customer retention. How comes that into play? The probability of selling to an existing customer is so much higher. I think I recently read some statistics of like 60 to 70% was the probability of selling to a new prospect is only 5 to 20%. And so there is an enormous often neglected potential in thinking about your existing customers a little bit more often.
I really love that you said that the customer centricity actually spans the entire organization, by the way, and I'm going to share an example of that a little bit further down in our talk. But first of all, employees are the first line to customers. So how does company culture impact that customer experience? Because you did talk about the entire organization as a part of that customer centricity plan. So culture clearly has a very big impact, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. For me, this concept means that you are highly aligned between your goals and your internal and external communication and behavior towards clients, service partners, and of course also your employees. So it would mean that you apply like several values that belong to customer centricity within your organization first. So indeed, a very big cultural topic.
Mm-hmm. So if we know we need to address corporate culture to improve our customer experience, then if we're talking about this term that's a buzzword, what are some real methods we can use? I know you're great at that. What are some real methods we can use to actually audit our company's culture and see if we're doing what we say we're doing?
Well, first of all, very simple, look at your vision statement. Is the customer included there already? And I mean, if you don't have a vision statement, then of course that tells you something. Yeah, but that's the first step.
You know, I mean, this is actually the example I was going to mention just now. It's so elegant, yet so overlooked as a starting point. And 2 weeks ago, we had Birgit speak to us about CEOs are actually CVOs, Chief Vision Officers. And I remember at a bank that I worked at in Canada, the vision statement was be the better bank. And we'd always be questioned, why are you not the best? And I'll tell you why, because the best is a moving target. We can always strive to be better. Somebody else says they're the best one year and somebody does it better the next year. So be the better bank really resonated throughout the bank, because it was like, yeah, best is, yeah, it doesn't mean anything because anybody could be better the next year, right? But sorry, continue, share more of your tactics, please.
Yes, but that was a very nice example, very to the point. Yeah, but to get closer to your audit about how well your customer centricity is lived in your company, ask your employees. What do they perceive to be the highest value to the customer that you deliver? And then look, are your employees aligned about that? Do they all answer in a similar way? Do they know what to answer at all? Are they enthusiastic about what they are answering? Or is it more like, yeah. And then in the same way, you can ask your team leads and your management team, when did each department last do something in favor of the customer experience? And this can be very little things. E.g. for a service provider, it can mean built-in check-in calls after important projects or project milestones, for example. So it doesn't always have to be the big new launch or the big new project, but it can be many, many little details that add together for the experience of your customers.
And you were saying just simply to ask them what they have done. And I know just by asking that, I can envision that's a great reminder to inspire or notice and even share ideas of what's working. I know when I worked with one company about their sales enablement process. And so they were talking about how one of the things that actually really worked was their sales team. One of the members of the sales team had developed a slide to help his clients win buy-in for a rather complex purchase where the user was very far away from the signing authority. And just simply this slide, so that the client didn't have to make a slide, was so much help. And by asking, he shared that concept with everyone in the team.
And now imagine if you can motivate every employee of your company to think of these little steps day by day, then these will already add up to a great customer experience and a great connection to your customers.
So speaking of customers, okay, you've given us some ideas that we can have right within our own organization, but and that's before we even look outside the business, but what do we actually do with the customers?
Yeah, I mean, we're still talking about easy and simple steps, right? So there you can look at statistics like your customer reviews, implement systems like Net Promoter Score, look at social media comments and interactions. So these would be the things to glance at in the first moment, for example. And then customer service is obviously always a great source. And one thing I always liked at Amazon, and I can only encourage that for many companies, is to motivate your management team and also other members to spend several days in the customer service teams at several times of the year, so that they can really have these touch points with the customers and don't get lost in the clouds, so to say, if you know what I mean.
Are you actually talking?
Actually talking, yes, actually talking. Yes, I mean, you cannot, maybe some of them you don't want to have them talking to the customer, but ideally, yes, also talking.
Actually, but there is a point to that, because part of the bank promotion was that you had to do a rotation in the branches before you could get promoted within the bank. Because how can you run an organization that's based on customer service in a bank branch and not have had any experience of doing it? So actually it informed a lot of what was happening at the higher decision-making levels, because after that rotation, that 6 months that you spent at the branch, the way you run your area is going to be a lot different, because you know how it's going to impact at the front line. I mean, I also had where we had redesigned the mortgage applications, and everybody at the top was doing a great job. And I even, as you had said, Laura, I mapped it out on a slide because they couldn't envision what it would be like for the sales clerk at the end, or the person sitting behind the desk. But here's the kicker, is that, and this comes back to your point about this holistic strategy, Melanie, we did this incredible job. It became one-page application, immediate adjudication, so approvals, and yet they hadn't communicated it to the branch, that they have to, the first time, do the map up against the adjudication. And so it was actually creating trouble at the branch level, even though we had designed it with the branch in mind. So I was actually doing a rotation in the branch, and I'm like, well, once I explained it, everyone was like, that's amazing. I'm like, yeah, but why did you not get this information? Like, so it's really, I think there is something to be said for every customer. Every manager needs to be at that customer front line. And where you say some of them shouldn't talk to the customers, actually, then should they be in that business at all? Maybe they shouldn't, right? Because it is a customer business. Anyway, this leads me to one of the audience questions, which is, can you give an example of a good outcome based on your corporate culture tips that you had given?
Yes, for example, a work that we did for a media house lately. What we did there was we took a deep dive on their customer persona, and it made them much more, it gave them much more clarity about who their core customer group really is and what their true daily needs and challenges are. And then we could translate this into problems which this publishing house can actually solve with their products. And so this again then made it much more easy and efficient for them to decide which benefits of the product have to be communicated and where and when. And this was a tremendous help. We did that in a process with internal workshops, pulling external experts in, looking at market data, but also doing qualitative interviews with some of their real customers. So we had a really diverse picture. And the outcome was that they can tackle their growth objectives much more efficiently now and are already seeing higher growth rates in organic reach, for example, in their marketing. Yeah. And do you also want to hear a B2B example, for example?
Yes. I love B2B.
Cool. Yeah, because
because I think people forget that B2B also has a customer-facing aspect. It's not just a B2C consumer customer, but you have customers in all different areas of business.
Yeah, and it often gets forgotten, or there's often the assumption, oh, there's nothing to do there, there's nothing we can do. I don't know, something like that. But for example, for a media agency, I optimized and looked at all their project execution processes with them lately. And we looked at all the touch points that they have with their clients. And there, for example, you have something like a rebriefing in the beginning. Then you have meetings after important milestones, transparency you can give or not give at certain time points and so on. And also not to forget social interaction and communication. Social interaction has fallen short in many cases as we cannot meet people anymore, you know, like the beer you usually drank with colleagues after a successful launch or a project, and like sometimes this is just dropped. But all these little things also there in the B2B process can make the difference. And in most cases, it's never the end result alone that makes clients happy. Very far from it.
I think you once told us that the number of touch points that it takes. I have a question from the audience, which I want to bring to you. And I think you had mentioned touch points at one point. What was it? 7 touch points for each customer or something, especially in B2B. This is really relevant, right? Yeah.
I think it was rather general that you have to reach your customers 7 times to start getting to the top of their mind. So fantastic. Yeah, but it also translates I have a question and how you have to keep in touch.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that's important for people to keep in mind, because that's your beer and your calls and your email. Like that's every touch point that you have, especially in B2B. The question from the audience is, Amazon has a great customer-centric DNA, improved over the last 2 decades, but how do you get a traditional German Mittelstand to get customer centricity in their DNA? This seems like a big mindset change. And I know that we do have a lot of people from Germany on the call. So that's why German Mittelstand is often mentioned. It's small to medium enterprises for those that are listening outside of Germany, and they're not all very customer centric because, and I would get you to expand on this, Melanie, is they're often privately owned. They're often family businesses. They're often companies that have been around for a really long time, right? So what would you suggest to these companies on how they can shift their mindset towards customer?
Yeah. I mean, there is a good point already in the question. We always forget that companies like Amazon, they didn't do it on their first day. They grew over several decades and tested and learned and tested and learned. And then they, they became suddenly like this. How can we ever reach that? And that doesn't have to be the big vision that we fear, but it can start much more simple, and you can really start with looking at your vision, start a discussion with your employees and with your teams about what their opinion is, what is already there in the company, and then go from there with the few steps, for example, that I have described before. And also an assumption that is not always correct, I think. A lot of companies in Germany who are which are already great at that, and especially in the Mittelstand, we have the hidden champions in many different industry areas, which are very customer centric because they produce products which are very precisely tailored to a niche, to a certain problem, to a certain need, and you can always ask yourself the question, whom am I solving a problem for, and how can I solve this problem even better? And then you go from there.
Great answer. I think, Laura, you had a question?
I did. I was wondering, I think talking there about these hidden champions, you're talking to some of those words that I just love, people who come through in very challenging situations, the superheroes of our business world who solve the problems that we have and save us from the outcome we didn't want to see ahead of us. And so what kinds of things have actually come out of the pandemic? We are in the midst still of a couple of years now of really unusual challenges. And I'm guessing you've got a few situations where the outcomes were more challenging than just easy, hey, we could make our customers happy by doing X, Y, and Z. To share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I think many companies and even whole industries had trouble reaching their customers, redefining their businesses. And of course, in certain areas, this still provides a huge problem and also a disaster for some companies. But many good things have come out of that. For one thing, a lot of target groups, or a lot of, I'd rather like to talk of people, groups of people have become more digital who haven't been so before. And so they can be reached with technology, be it the good old phone call, or which is maybe in many cases much more acceptable if you cannot meet in person. But also like chat systems, messengers like email and so on. So that would be the basic, that you can reach people more through those channels. But there have developed whole products that are digitally based. Like if you think about the startups that tailor to mental health problems, and some of them are completely digitally. Yeah, and amazing. I think that is a huge advantage, something that came out of a situation that was really troublesome to start with.
We have about 8 minutes left, so I'm going to move this along because we do have a few more questions from the audience, but some of them are answered in your final 5 tips that you're going to give us, Melanie. So first of all, I think let's start holistically. Why can we still not afford to ignore customer centricity? I mean, there are lots of businesses out there who think they somehow are okay. Why can they still not afford to ignore it? I know that's a big question, but if you could dive in, then it'll lead us into your 5 tips.
Yeah, it's difficult where to start there, because there are, like, I always hear many reasons, of course. I mean, first of all, we have saturated markets. We have a high competition in many countries, many industries, and we have more and more consume-oriented, consume-conscious, and also consume-sensitive customers to deal with. And if you are delivering a real value and real added value to the life of the people you want to sell to, then that is your one differentiator. And that is also a differentiator that you can keep and that you can rely on a little bit more over time than, I don't know, just on your luck with Google search results, for example, maybe. Yeah, and another thing is that values like integrity and authenticity, which I see at the core of customer centricity as well, they also have been brought more into the focus. Very good for all of us, in my opinion. And so if you try to be more customer centric, ideally you also answer to that demand too. So
true. Yeah. And you show that you trust and respect your customer as well. So given those things, why is it so important to future success, future growth over time, rather than just a nice to have today in challenging situations?
Yeah, I mean, most products or services are interchangeable, right? And so, oh my God, not something everybody wants to hear. No, I know, but yes, cases. And yeah, so the way how you treat your customer, how you listen, and how you also connect on an emotional level, which you only can do if you know who your customer is and you understand them. That is what converts like the abstract audience into a paying client, and from there into a recurring customer, which is where we are again at this topic of retention. And then, you know, hopefully into like a loyal and long-term fan, which is what we aim for, because then on that base you can have like a more reliable and long-term sustainable growth, hopefully.
Okay, we're running out of time, and I do want you to get to your 5 tips. There's been a few questions from the audience, actually quite some. So we will answer those throughout the rest of this next 4 minutes. And also I will come back to you with the answers if we don't get to them. But the main thing that we were asked is, which 3 initial steps would you recommend for a company who wants to become more customer-centric, which I think you're about to cover. But there was also a follow-up question about who's in charge of that, establishing customer centricity in the organization. You know, who drives it? Is it marketing, sales, customer service? But I think all of that is kind of wrapped up in your final 5 tips. So I would love if you would dig in and give us that low-hanging fruit, the takeaways that you had identified.
Okay, so the 5 tips to start with would add, first, look at your vision and how well the customer is represented in that already. Second, trigger the discussion within your company, for example, with some of the points and questions I mentioned before. Third, talk to a real customer today, if you haven't yet, and ask them about their most positive and negative experiences. And in that same context, you can also implement neutral platforms and systems like Proven Expert, for example, for B2B businesses, or Trusted Shops for e-commerce businesses, to gather customer feedback, show the customer your respect, and gain valuable insight at the same time. 4th step is already a little bit more effort. Use agile methods to develop your products and strategies. Not in all, but in many cases, with those methods, you can feed into customer feedback much more quickly in the process, and therefore be more customer-centric. And lastly, use tech to support you wherever you can, because customer centricity today can be a very exhausting job because of all the challenges that we talked about before. So use every automation you can, for example, to schedule and automate your digital marketing, but also in a sensible way. Don't get lost in technology by all means. And yeah, now who is in charge about all of that? That is, some companies like to hear that, some are not, but in charge is the head of the company, like the owner of the company, the CEO. However the organization is structured, it always starts from the top to initiate this and to lead by example, to bring the culture to the teams. And then, of course, hopefully through education, trainings, discussions, all the time, you can motivate and encourage the whole organization to think about the customer in their daily business and make suggestions for improvements. But as most of us know, one single employee or also one single head of marketing can not do much if this doesn't start from the top.
Okay, we have 1 minute left, and I want you to share your final takeaway. But I guess the main thing to think about here is that same bank that I worked for, the one question we all asked was, will this serve the customer? And that's by every decision maker and every employee, if you have the right person at the top, to your point, Melanie, who drives it forward. Thank you so much for sharing so many relevant and quick tips that people can put into action. I think your holistic customer experience strategy gives us clear tactics. I would like you to give one last aspirational takeaway before I wrap us up.
Yeah, I think you can think about that like a seed you plant. And it's the same with your customers. Stick to your vision and to your methods to become more and more centric. Be a little bit patient, because it's not a short-term tactic, as I said, but then you will move beyond this one-time sale. You will excel at customer retention over time, and then you will be surrounded by loyal customers and true fans, hopefully, who will eventually carry your company farther than you imagine today.
Aspirational. Thank you so much. So there you have it. Remember to listen personally as well as digitally. Make sure insights get shared within your organization, and don't forget, transfer your learnings into action. And you've already got the tips from Melanie. Some say employees are your first customers. So next week we will be sharing tips for recruiting for 2022, how you can find talent in this changing and challenging recruiting environment. We continue with our Bitcoin series on Friday at 11:30, and in the meantime, audio will be shared on Spotify, video is shared on YouTube. Information on where to reach Melanie will be below both. And thank you so much for joining, and see you online next week. Thanks to you both.
Thank you very much.
Bye.